The thundering hooves of her stolen mare were the only sounds that drowned out Tabitha Sullivan's pounding heart as she fled westward, the rising sun at her back, illuminating the bruises that circled her wrists like macabre bracelets. Montana Territory, 1879, had never seemed so vast or so promising as it did now, with nothing but open country ahead and the cruel memory of her father's grip behind her. Tabitha's golden hair whipped across her face as she urged her horse faster, ignoring the ache in her bones from riding through the night. At 22, she had finally gathered the courage to leave after her father's drunken rage had turned more violent than ever before. The bruises would fade, but the fear wouldn't not unless she put enough distance between them. 3 days of hard riding had taken their toll. Her provisions were dwindling, and the crisp autumn air cut through her thin coat. She needed shelter, food, and safety, though she hardly dared hope for the latter. The small town appearing on the horizon seemed like a mirage, its wooden buildings rising from the prairie like sentinels of civilization. Timber Creek was barely a town, just a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a dusty main street. Tabitha slowed her exhausted horse to a walk as she approached, conscious of the stares that followed her. A woman traveling alone was uncommon enough to draw attention, and her disheveled appearance only heightened curiosity. The mare stumbled beneath her, nearly sending Tabitha to the ground. She dismounted quickly, her legs trembling with fatigue as they took her weight. Leading the horse toward the water trough in front of the general store, she became acutely aware of her vulnerability. "You look like you've ridden through hell itself, miss." Tabitha startled at the deep voice, turning to face a tall man leaning against a hitching post. His weathered face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but she could see eyes the color of a summer storm watching her with undisguised interest. His stance was relaxed, but she recognized the alertness in his gaze, the mark of someone who survived by noticing details. "I'm fine," she said, the words catching in her dry throat. He straightened, and Tabitha instinctively stepped back, raising her arms defensively. The action pushed back her sleeves, exposing the purple and yellow bruises circling her wrists. The man's expression darkened as his gaze fixed on the bruises. Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or anger before his features settled into a careful neutrality. "Name's Victor Zimmerman," he said, keeping his distance. "Most folks call me Vic." Tabitha hesitated, wondering if giving her real name was wise. "Tabitha Sullivan," she finally replied, deciding truth was simpler than lies she'd need to remember. Victor nodded, his gaze still lingering on her bruises. "You need a place to stay, Miss Sullivan. I don't have much money." "Didn't ask about your money situation," he replied, his voice softer now. "Asked if you needed a place." Tabitha hesitated, weighing her limited options. She could sleep in the stables if there were any, or continue riding until she collapsed. Neither choice seemed particularly appealing. "There's work at my ranch," Victor continued when she didn't respond. "Could use someone to help with cooking and such. Got a cabin for hired help that's sitting empty." "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" Suspicion edged her voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Folks out here understand running from something. Sometimes all a person needs is a chance to catch their breath." He gestured toward her wrists, though he made no move to touch her. "No one will touch you here, not without your permission. That's a promise." Those words, so simple yet so powerful, nearly broke her composure. How long had it been since someone had respected her boundaries? "I can cook," she said finally. "And so, I'm good with horses too," Victor nodded. "That'll do for a start. My place is about 5 miles northwest." "You and your horse look dead on your feet. There's a meal and a bed waiting if you want it." Tabitha glanced around the small town, searching for other options and finding none that seemed as straightforward. "What about my father, if he comes looking?" Victor's expression hardened. "Montana's a big territory, Miss Sullivan, and I don't take kindly to men who leave marks like those." It wasn't a declaration of protection exactly, but something in his steady gaze made her believe him. After years of fearing her father's unpredictable temper, trusting this stranger seemed reckless. Yet something told her Victor Zimmerman was nothing like the man she'd fled. "I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman," she said, finding her voice stronger than she expected. "Thank you." Victor tipped his hat. "Let's get your horse some proper rest and food first, then we'll do the same for you." As they led her mare toward the livery stable, Tabitha felt the weight of stares following them down the street. She wondered what they saw: a bedraggled runaway and the taciturn rancher. "Or something else entirely, don't mind them," Victor said quietly. "News is a rare commodity out here. By tomorrow, they'll be gossiping about something else." The livery stable smelled of hay and horses, a comforting scent after days on the trail. Victor spoke briefly with the stable master, passing over coins that Tabitha knew she couldn't repay. "I'll work off whatever you're spending," she said firmly. Victor merely nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "Your horse will be well cared for. She's a fine animal." "She's stolen," Tabitha admitted, deciding that if she was to trust this man, honesty was required. "From my father. She was mine before he took her away as punishment." "Then she's just returned to her rightful owner," Victor replied without hesitation. "No theft in that." From the livery, they walked to a small restaurant where Victor secured them a quiet table in the corner. Tabitha tried not to devour the stew and bread placed before her, but hunger overcame manners. Victor said nothing about her appetite, simply ordering another basket of bread when the first was emptied. "How long have you been on the run?" he asked when she'd finally slowed her eating. 3 days, she admitted. "Left after." She gestured toward her wrists. Victor's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You're safe now. You don't know my father. Don't need to. I know his kind." Victor's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. Men who hurt those weaker than themselves rather than face their own failings. The perceptiveness of his observations startled her. "He wasn't always so cruel, after my mother died." She trailed off, unwilling to make excuses for the man who had transformed from a stern but loving father into a monster. "Grief can break a person," Victor acknowledged. "But it doesn't give them the right to break others." When they'd finished eating, Victor led her to a general store. "You'll need proper clothes for ranch work," he said, "and something warmer for the coming winter." Tabitha shook her head. "I can't accept. Consider it an advance on your wages," Victor interrupted. "Can't have my cook freezing to death before she's made a single meal." The hint of humor in his voice surprised her, and she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. The shopkeeper's wife helped her select several practical dresses, a heavy coat, sturdy boots, and other necessities. Victor added work gloves, a scarf, and thick wool socks to the pile without comment. When they left the store, their purchases wrapped in brown paper packages, the sun was beginning its descent. Victor loaded the packages onto his wagon, then helped Tabitha onto the seat beside him. "It's not a fancy rig," he said, "but it'll get us there before dark." As they left the small town behind, Tabitha felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. She was placing her trust in a stranger, following him to an isolated ranch with only his word that she would be safe. It was reckless, perhaps even foolish. Yet something about Victor Zimmerman's quiet strength reassured her. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "It's nothing grand," he replied. 300 acres, most of it grazing land. Run about 100 head of cattle, give or take. Got a decent house, a bunkhouse for the hands, though I'm down to just 2 full-time now: barn, corral, and the cabin where you'll stay." "How long have you been there?" "Going on 8 years. Came out from Pennsylvania after the war. Needed open sky and room to breathe." The war. That explained something about him: the watchfulness, the hint of shadow that sometimes crossed his face. He couldn't be much more than 30, Tabitha realized, which meant he'd been young when he fought. "You were a soldier?" Victor nodded. "Union cavalry, enlisted at 17, though I told them I was 18. A faint smile touched his lips. They didn't look too hard at birth records back then. They needed bodies. "And after was harder than during," he said simply. "Took me a while to find my way here." They passed the rest of the journey exchanging small pieces of themselves. Tabitha told him about growing up in a small Illinois town, about her mother's death from fever 3 years ago, and how her father had changed afterward. Victor spoke of building his ranch from nearly nothing, of the harsh winters and satisfying work. Neither pried too deeply into the other's wounds, respecting the boundaries of their newly formed acquaintance. Yet by the time the ranch buildings appeared on the horizon, Tabitha felt she knew Victor Zimmerman better than she'd known anyone in a long time. The ranch was exactly as Victor had described it, modest, but well-maintained. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of logs and clapboard, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A larger barn stood nearby, with corrals spreading outward. Beyond them, cattle dotted the grassland, dark shapes against the golden light of sunset. "Home," Victor said simply as he drew the wagon to a halt. Two men emerged from the barn at their arrival, curiosity evident on their weathered faces. "Boss, didn't expect you back so soon," the older of the two called. His gaze shifted to Tabitha, surprise registering briefly before his expression settled into polite neutrality. "Charlie, Emmett, this is Miss Sullivan," Victor said. "She'll be taking over the cooking and helping around the place." Charlie, the older man with a salt and pepper beard, touched his hat in greeting. "Madam, welcome to the Z-Bar," Emmett, younger with a shock of red hair, nodded awkwardly. Miss Sullivan's had a long journey," Victor continued. "Emmett, would you mind bringing her things to the cabin?" "Charlie, let's get these packages inside." The efficiency with which the men moved to follow Victor's instructions spoke of respect rather than fear, another point in the rancher's favor, Tabitha thought. The cabin that was to be her new home sat about 50 yards from the main house, close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. It was small but solidly built, with a stone chimney and a tiny porch. Inside, she found a single room divided by function. A bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs in another, a cook stove along one wall, and simple shelves and hooks for storage. "It's not much," Victor said as he set down the last of her packages, "but it's warm and dry." "It's perfect," Tabitha replied honestly. After months of tiptoeing around her father's volatile moods, this small sanctuary seemed like unimaginable luxury. Victor pointed out the outhouse behind the cabin and the well they shared with the main house. "There's firewood stacked along the side. If you need anything else, just ask. We eat breakfast at sunrise, midday meal around noon, and supper after the day's work is done. You can start tomorrow, get some rest tonight." As he turned to leave, Tabitha called after him, "Mr. Zimmerman." He paused in the doorway, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything," he nodded, his expression softening. "Sleep well, Miss Sullivan, you're safe here." After he left, Tabitha stood in the middle of her new home, hardly daring to believe her change in circumstances. 24 hours ago, she had been fleeing in terror, certain her father would hunt her down and drag her back to a life of fear and pain. Now she had shelter, employment, and the promise of safety. She unpacked her new clothes, hanging them carefully on the wooden pegs along the wall. The last item she unwrapped was a small mirror, and she caught her reflection with a start. Dark circles shadowed her blue eyes, and her normally rosy complexion was pale with exhaustion. Her golden hair hung in tangles around her face. The bruises on her wrists stood out starkly against her skin, visible reminders of what she'd escaped. She traced them gently, wondering how long they would take to fade. The physical marks would disappear, but would the memories fade as well? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Opening it cautiously, she found Emmett standing there, a steaming bucket in one hand and a basket in the other. "Miss Sullivan, Mr. Zimmerman thought you might want some hot water," he said, carefully avoiding looking directly at her. "And Mrs. Holloway from town sent some supper things when she heard we had a lady coming." "Thank you, Emmett," she said, accepting the items. "If you need anything else, madam, just holler. I'm in the bunkhouse with Charlie." After he left, Tabitha discovered the basket contained freshly baked bread, a jar of preserves, a wedge of cheese, and a note welcoming her to Timber Creek, signed by someone named Martha Holloway. The kindness of these strangers brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Using the hot water to wash away the dust and fatigue of her journey, Tabitha felt her spirits lift. Perhaps here, among these people who offered help without demands, she could build something new, something that belonged to her alone. That night, she slept deeply for the first time in months, no longer listening for her father's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Morning came with the sound of movement around the ranch, men's voices, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. Tabitha dressed quickly in one of her new work dresses and made her way to the main house, determined to earn her keep. The house's kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, though it showed signs of bachelor living, functional but lacking any feminine touches. Victor was seated at the large table, a cup of coffee in front of him and papers spread across the surface. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Miss Sullivan, didn't expect to see you so early." "I'm here to cook," she replied, already surveying the kitchen to familiarize herself with its organization. "Unless you've changed your mind about hiring me," a faint smile curved his lips. "Not at all. Coffee's fresh if you want some." Tabitha poured herself a cup before opening cupboards and the icebox to take inventory. She found flour, sugar, eggs, bacon, and other staples enough to prepare a proper breakfast. As she began mixing biscuit dough, she felt Victor watching her. "I've been managing the cooking since Mrs. Fletcher left to care for her daughter's new baby," he explained. "The men are probably tired of bacon and beans." "I'll try to provide more variety," Tabitha promised, setting the oven to heat. Charlie and Emmett arrived as she was frying bacon, their appreciative sniffs confirming Victor's assessment of their recent meals. They sat at the table with awkward politeness, clearly uncertain how to behave with a woman present. The breakfast she served, biscuits, bacon, eggs, and gravy, earned her immediate approval from all three men. Their enthusiastic consumption was better than any verbal compliment. "Miss Sullivan," Charlie said as he finished his third biscuit, "if you cook like this every day, we might never let you leave." His words were meant as a jest, but they struck an uncomfortable chord. Tabitha's smile faltered as memories of her father's controlling grip surfaced. Victor, noticing her discomfort, intervened smoothly. "Miss Sullivan is free to stay or go as she chooses, Charlie. We're fortunate she's chosen to stay for now." The subtle emphasis on her freedom wasn't lost on Tabitha. She met Victor's gaze briefly, grateful for his understanding. After breakfast, Victor showed her the smokehouse, root cellar, and garden, now mostly harvested for the season but still yielding late vegetables. "Whatever you need that we don't have, write it down. I go into town every other week for supplies." As days turned into weeks, Tabitha settled into life at the Z-Bar Ranch. She cooked 3 meals a day, kept the main house tidy, and gradually added her touch to both the house and her cabin. Victor provided fabric when she mentioned curtains would brighten the spaces, and tools when she expressed interest in expanding the dormant garden come spring. The bruises on her wrists faded, but Tabitha's wariness was slower to disappear. She started at unexpected sounds, positioned herself with her back to walls, and avoided being alone with any of the men in enclosed spaces. None of them commented on these behaviors, but she often caught Victor watching her with a knowing look that spoke of his own demons. October gave way to November, bringing shorter days and frost-covered mornings. Tabitha learned the rhythm of ranch life: the early breakfasts before dawn, the constant work with livestock, the satisfaction of seeing tasks completed. She began joining Victor on his trips to town, gradually meeting the small community and establishing her own connections. Martha Holloway, the shopkeeper's wife who had sent the welcome basket, became a particular friend. A motherly woman in her 50s, Martha took Tabitha under her wing, introducing her to other women in the area and including her in their quilting circle. "You've brought life back to Victor," Martha commented one afternoon as they sorted through fabric scraps. "He's been alone too long." "We're employer and employee, nothing more," Tabitha protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Martha's knowing smile only deepened her embarrassment. "Of course, dear. I've just never seen him bring any other employee to town with him regularly. Or look at them the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Tabitha couldn't deny that something had shifted in her relationship with Victor over the past weeks. Their conversations had grown longer, more personal. She'd learned about his family back east, his nightmares from the war, his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she'd shared more of herself: her love of books, her mother's recipes, even some of the darker moments with her father. They'd developed a comfortable routine in the evenings. After supper, While Charlie and Emmett retired to the bunkhouse, Victor would often invite Tabitha to stay by the fire. Sometimes they talked, other times they simply shared the silence, Victor whittling or reviewing ranch accounts while Tabitha sewed or read from one of his books. It was during one of these quiet evenings in late November that Tabitha finally asked the question that had lingered since their first meeting. "How did you know?" she asked, setting aside her mending. "When you saw my bruises that first day, you understood immediately. How?" Victor's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was carving. For a long moment he stared into the fire, and Tabitha thought he might not answer. "My mother," he said finally, his voice low. "My father was not a kind man, especially when he drank." He set down the half-finished carving, a small wooden horse taking shape under his skilled hands. "She had bruises like yours, always wore long sleeves even in summer, made excuses about being clumsy." Tabitha waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I was 14 when I finally stood up to him," Victor continued. "Got between them during one of his rages. He broke my arm for my trouble, but it changed something, made him see himself differently maybe." He flexed his left arm unconsciously. "He never hit her again, far as I know." "Started drinking less too." "Is that why you joined the army, to get away?" Victor nodded. "Partly, mostly it was the war itself. Felt like I had to do something that mattered. And your mother, is she still?" "She died while I was away fighting. Fever took her." His voice held old grief. "Never got to say goodbye." Tabitha reached across the space between them, placing her hand on his. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact with any man since her escape, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Victor turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting. His skin was rough from work, warm against hers. It was a long time ago. They sat like that for several moments, hands joined, the firelight playing across their faces. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared pain and resilience. Finally, Victor gently withdrew his hand. "It's getting late. You should get some rest." As Tabitha walked back to her cabin that night, snowflakes beginning to drift from the dark sky, she acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Victor Zimmerman. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. After her experiences with her father, the idea of giving a man any power over her heart seemed dangerously foolish. Yet Victor had never given her reason to fear him. In fact, he had gone out of his way to ensure she felt safe keeping his distance physically, making it clear she was free to leave at any time, respecting her boundaries without requiring explanation. The first heavy snow came overnight, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Tabitha woke to find everything blanketed in white, the familiar landscape rendered new and magical. Making her way carefully to the main house, she found Victor already stoking the fire in the kitchen stove. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought you might sleep in with the snow." "Too beautiful to miss," she replied, moving to help with breakfast preparations. Their movements around the kitchen had become a comfortable dance, each anticipating the other's needs. As the winter deepened, life at the ranch settled into its cold weather rhythms. The cattle required constant attention in the harsh conditions, and the men often returned from their daily work exhausted and frost-bitten. Tabitha began preparing larger, heartier meals and keeping pots of coffee and stew warm throughout the day. Christmas approached, bringing with it a wistful nostalgia. This would be Tabitha's first Christmas away from home, and despite the painful memories of recent years, she found herself missing the traditions she had shared with her mother. Victor noticed her melancholy one evening as she gazed out the window at the snow-covered yard. "Something troubling you?" he asked, joining her by the window. "Just thinking about Christmas," she admitted. "Mother always made it special, even when we didn't have much. What were your traditions?" Tabitha smiled at the memories. "We'd make ornaments from whatever we could find: pine cones, ribbons, paper, bake special cookies, sing carols around the piano." Her smile faded. "After she died, Father couldn't bear to celebrate, said it was frivolous nonsense." Victor was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Would you like to have Christmas here? Not just the day itself, but the preparations too?" The unexpected offer touched her deeply. "You wouldn't mind," Victor's expression softened. I haven't had a proper Christmas since before the war. I'd welcome it. And so a new tradition began at the Z-Bar Ranch. Tabitha taught Charlie and Emmett how to string popcorn and cranberries for garlands. Victor returned from a trip to town with candles, ribbons, and small gifts hidden in his saddlebags. Together they selected a pine tree from the ridge behind the ranch, setting it up in the corner of the main house's living room. On Christmas Eve, Martha Holloway and several other families from nearby ranches joined them for a feast prepared by Tabitha. The house rang with laughter and conversation, the lonely silence of previous winters banished by shared joy. As the guests departed and Charlie and Emmett retired to the bunkhouse, Victor asked Tabitha to stay a while longer. They sat before the fire, the room illuminated only by its glow and the candles on the Christmas tree. "I have something for you," Victor said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "It's not much, but—" Tabitha carefully unwrapped it to reveal a wooden carving a horse in full gallop, its mane and tail flowing in an invisible wind. The detail was exquisite, from the powerful muscles to the expressive eyes. "Victor," she breathed, running her fingertips over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful." "Reminded me of that mare you rode in on," he said. "She carried you to freedom, seemed fitting." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. The gift represented more than craftsmanship, it showed how well Victor understood her journey. "Thank you, I'll treasure it always." "I have something else too," he added, his voice taking on an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Not exactly a gift, more of a proposition." Tabitha looked up, curiosity mingling with sudden apprehension. "The ranch is doing well," Victor began, "better than it has in years, partly thanks to your management of the household. I've been thinking about the future, about expanding operations." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "There's a parcel of land adjoining the northern boundary. Good water access, excellent grazing, the owners willing to sell at a fair price. With that addition, the Z-Bar could support twice the herd we run now." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Tabitha said, uncertain where this was leading. It would mean more work. "More hands to hire, more meals to cook, more of everything." Victor met her gaze directly. "I wouldn't ask an employee to take on that kind of responsibility without compensation, but a partner." The word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning, a partner. Tabitha repeated, her heart beginning to race. "A full partner in the ranch and in life if you were willing." Victor's steady gaze held hers. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife, Tabitha." The proposal was so practical, so characteristic of Victor's straightforward nature, that Tabitha almost smiled despite her shock. "This isn't about romance or poetry," he continued when she remained silent. "Though I care for you deeply more than I thought possible after all these years alone. It's about building something together, something that belongs to both of us." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You'd have legal rights to half of everything. Your own money, your own say in how things are run, if you ever wanted to leave." He swallowed. "You could with your share. You'd never be trapped." The consideration behind his offer moved her profoundly. Victor wasn't just proposing marriage, he was offering her independence within partnership, the freedom to choose him every day rather than be bound by necessity or fear. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to answer now," Victor said. "Take whatever time you need, it's a big decision." Tabitha looked down at their joined hands, then at the wooden horse she still held. "When I left my father's house, I swore I'd never again put myself in a position where a man could control me," she said slowly. "I was so focused on what I was running from that I barely considered what I might be running toward." She raised her eyes to his. "These past months I've found not just safety here, but purpose. Joy even. A lot of that is because of you, Victor." His hand tightened fractionally around hers. "Is that a yes?" "It's I need a little time," she replied honestly. "Not because I don't care for you, I do, very much, but because I want to be certain I'm choosing this for the right reasons." Victor nodded, disappointment visible in his eyes but acceptance too. "Fair enough. The offer stands whenever you're ready to answer." As Tabitha made her way back to her cabin that night, the wooden horse clutched in her hand. Her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Marriage to Victor would provide security, companionship, and the chance to build something lasting. She cared for him, deeply loved him, if she was honest with herself. Yet doubt lingered. Was she simply exchanging one form of dependency for another? Victor was nothing like her father, but could she truly trust any man with her future after what she'd experienced? The days after Christmas passed in a flurry of ordinary activities: cooking, cleaning, mending, but Tabitha's thoughts remained focused on Victor's proposal. He behaved exactly as he had before, neither pressuring her for an answer nor withdrawing his attention. If anything, his consideration only made her decision more difficult. New Year's Eve arrived with a blast of frigid air from the north. The temperature plummeted, turning the ranch into an ice-bound fortress. Victor and the men spent the day checking on the cattle, ensuring they had access to feed and unfrozen water. Tabitha had just finished preparing a special supper to mark the turning of the year when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a rider approaching, hunched against the biting wind. The rider dismounted awkwardly, as if injured or exhausted. As he stumbled toward the house, Tabitha's blood turned to ice. Even bundled against the cold, there was no mistaking that bulky frame, that distinctive loping gait. Her father had found her. Panic seized her, momentarily paralyzing her where she stood. How had he tracked her here? What would he do when he saw her? Where was Victor? The sound of the door opening galvanized her into action. She retreated to the kitchen, searching frantically for an escape route, but the back door would take her directly into his path if he circled the house. "Hello," her father's voice called. "Anyone home?" Footsteps approached the kitchen. Tabitha pressed herself against the wall, a kitchen knife clutched in her trembling hand. "Well, well," said Joshua Sullivan as he appeared in the doorway. "There you are, daughter." He looked terrible, gaunt and weathered, his normally ruddy complexion gray with cold and fatigue. His clothes were filthy, his beard untrimmed. The familiar smell of whiskey emanated from him despite the early hour. "How did you find me?" Tabitha managed to ask, the knife still gripped tightly. "Wasn't easy," he admitted, eyeing the knife but making no move toward her. "Been tracking you for months, followed rumors of a golden-haired girl heading west, asked in every town." A humorless smile twisted his lips. "People remember a pretty face." "What do you want?" "What do I want?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You're my daughter. You stole my horse and ran off without a word. What do you think I want?" "I'm not going back with you," Tabitha said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Not ever." Her father's expression darkened. "Now you listen here." "No, you listen." The knife in her hand stopped trembling. "You lost the right to tell me what to do when you decided your fists were an appropriate way to communicate." Joshua took a step toward her, and Tabitha raised the knife higher. "Stay back." "You threatening me, girl?" Disbelief colored his tone. "After all I've done for you. Fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head after your mother died, and beat me when you were drunk, controlled my every movement, made me afraid in my own home." Tabitha felt years of suppressed anger rising within her. "That's not love, father, that's tyranny." For a moment, something like shame flickered across Joshua's face, then his expression hardened again. "I'm your father, you owe me respect and obedience, I owe you nothing." The sound of the front door opening interrupted their standoff. Victor's voice called out, "Tabitha." "Whose horse is that out front?" Relief flooded through her. "In the kitchen," she called back, never taking her eyes off her father. Victor appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with one glance. Tabitha backed against the wall, knife in hand, facing the disheveled stranger. His hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "This is my father," Tabitha said. "He's just leaving." Joshua Sullivan looked between them, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Victor. "So this is where you've been hiding?" "Shacked up with some cowboy, Mr. Sullivan," Victor said, his tone still measured but with an edge of steel beneath. "Your daughter works for me as my cook and housekeeper. She has her own cabin and is well respected here." "Is that so? And I suppose you haven't touched her?" Joshua's crude implication hung in the air. Victor's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "No one touches Miss Sullivan without her permission. That includes her father." "She's coming home with me," Joshua insisted. She's my daughter and she's underage. I'm 22, Tabitha countered. A legal adult by any standard, and this is my home now. Her father's face contorted with anger. You ungrateful, that's enough, Victor interrupted, stepping fully into the room. Mr. Sullivan, you've had a long journey in harsh conditions. You're welcome to a meal and a place to sleep tonight. Tomorrow, you'll move on with, or without making peace with your daughter is entirely up to the two of you. The calm authority in Victor's voice seemed to deflate some of Joshua's bluster. He glanced around the warm kitchen, at the abundant food prepared for the evening meal, and Tabitha could see the calculation in his eyes. Confrontation would get him nowhere, not against Victor and certainly not with his daughter holding a knife. Fine, he muttered. Could use a hot meal. Tabitha lowered the knife, but kept it close as she moved to dish up food for her father. Victor remained in the doorway, his presence a reassuring barrier between her and the man who had dominated her life for so long. Supper was a tense affair. Charlie and Emmett joined them, their presence adding to Tabitha's sense of security. Her father ate ravenously, occasionally casting suspicious glances around the table but restraining himself from further outbursts. After the meal, Victor showed Joshua to the spare room, making it clear that the arrangement was for one night only. When he returned to the kitchen where Tabitha was cleaning up, his expression was grim. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Tabitha nodded, though her hands shook slightly as she dried a plate. "I never thought he'd find me. Do you want me to make him leave tonight? I can have Charlie ride with him to town, make sure he gets on the next stage east." The offer was tempting, but Tabitha shook her head. "No. Let him stay the night. Maybe with some sleep and sobriety we can talk properly in the morning." Victor studied her face. "You don't owe him forgiveness, Tabitha, or explanation." "I know," she sighed, "but I owe it to myself to face him on my terms. To end things properly so I can truly begin anew." Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be nearby all night. If you need anything at all, just call." That night, as Tabitha lay in her cabin listening to the wind howl around the eaves, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a prisoner in her own home, enduring her father's escalating abuse with dwindling hope. Now she had a home of her own, work that satisfied her, and people who respected her boundaries and valued her contributions. And Victor. The man who had offered her shelter without demands, who had proposed marriage with the promise of independence, who stood beside her rather than in front of her when danger threatened. The contrast between Victor and her father could not have been starker. One sought to control through fear, the other offered protection without possession. One demanded obedience, the other invited partnership. The answer she had been struggling with for days suddenly seemed crystal clear. Morning arrived with eerie stillness, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Tabitha rose early, dressing with particular care before making her way to the main house. She found Victor already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "Your father's still asleep," he said as she entered. "Or at least he hasn't come downstairs yet." Tabitha nodded, moving to start breakfast preparations. "Before he wakes, there's something I need to tell you." Victor set down the coffee mug he'd been holding, giving her his full attention. "I've made my decision," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "About your proposal." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, hope mingled with apprehension. "And, yes," Tabitha said simply, "I would be honored to be your wife and your partner in the ranch." Victor's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he smiled. He stepped toward her, then stopped, still maintaining the respectful distance he had always kept. "May I?" he asked softly, opening his arms. Tabitha closed the distance between them, stepping into his embrace for the first time. His arms encircled her gently, strong but not confining. She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "Have for months now." "I love you too," she replied, surprised by how natural the words felt. "That's why I needed time. I wanted to be sure it was love and not just gratitude or security I was feeling." Victor drew back slightly to look at her face, his eyes warm. "And now you're sure, completely." She smiled up at him. "Seeing my father again clarified everything. He showed me what love isn't. You've shown me what it is." A throat clearing from the doorway broke their moment of intimacy. They turned to find Joshua Sullivan watching them, his expression unreadable. "So it is like that," he said flatly. Victor's arm remained around Tabitha's waist, supportive but not restraining. "Mr. Sullivan, I've asked your daughter to marry me and she has accepted." Joshua's gaze shifted between them. "Known each other a few months, and already talking marriage." "Sometimes a few months is enough to know someone's character," Tabitha replied, "and sometimes 22 years isn't." The barb struck home. Her father flinched slightly. "I made breakfast," Tabitha continued, gesturing to the table where she had set out plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Let's eat, and then we can talk." The meal passed in awkward silence, broken only by requests to pass dishes. When they had finished, Victor excused himself to check on the cattle, giving Tabitha a questioning look. She nodded, reassuring him she would be fine alone with her father. When they were alone, Joshua stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. "Your mother would be ashamed of me." The admission startled Tabitha. "What? The way I've been since she died. The drinking, he gestured vaguely, unable to name his violence. "She always said I had a temper, but she knew how to calm me without her." He shook his head. "I lost myself." "That's no excuse," Tabitha said quietly. "Mother's death hurt me too. I needed a father, not a tyrant." Joshua's shoulders slumped. "I know, too late, but I know." He looked up at her, his eyes clearer than she had seen them in years. "Been sober 3 weeks. Since I got word someone matching your description was seen in Montana territory. Figured if I found you, I needed to be clear-headed." 3 weeks doesn't erase 3 years, Tabitha said, but her voice held less edge than before. "No, it doesn't." Joshua sighed heavily. "I didn't come to drag you back, not really. Told myself that's what I wanted, but truth is, I just needed to know you were alive, safe." "I am safe. Happier than I've been since before Mother died." Her father nodded slowly. "I can see that. This Zimmerman, he treats you right. Better than right. He respects me, values my thoughts and work, sees me as a person, not a possession." Tabitha met her father's gaze directly. "He loves me and I love him." Something like grief passed over Joshua's features. "I loved your mother like that once, before the drink got hold of me." He stared down at his hands. "I was a good husband to her, a good father to you in the beginning." "I remember," Tabitha said softly. "That's what made the change so painful." Silence stretched between them, weighted with years of hurt and the faint ghost of happier times. "I can't come back," Tabitha finally said. "Even if you've truly changed, there's too much damage. I'm building a new life here." "I understand." Joshua's voice was rough with emotion. "Don't suppose there's room in that new life for an old man trying to make amends?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Not to live with you," he clarified hastily. "Just to know you, maybe visit sometimes, write letters." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Be invited to the wedding, perhaps." Tabitha studied the man across from her, older and more broken than she remembered, showing the first genuine remorse she had seen from him in years. Was reconciliation possible after everything that had happened? "I can't promise anything," she said carefully. "Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but letters would be a start. If you're serious about staying sober, about changing." Hope flickered in Joshua's eyes. "I am. Got rid of every drop of whiskey in the house before I left. Joined that temperance society in town too." "Then write to me," Tabitha said. "Tell me about your progress. Show me with consistency that you've changed." She took a deep breath. "And if, after time, I see evidence of that change, perhaps we can discuss a visit." It was less than her father had hoped for, but more than he had any right to expect. He nodded, accepting the terms of this fragile truce. "As for the wedding," Tabitha continued, "that depends on when it happens and where you and I stand at that time." "Fair enough," Joshua conceded. More than fair, considering. When Victor returned an hour later, he found Tabitha and her father sitting in the living room, a Bible open between them. They looked up at his entrance, and Tabitha smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Everything all right?" Victor asked, glancing between them. "Getting there," Tabitha replied. "Father will be leaving today, but we've agreed to correspond, to see if there's a path forward." Victor nodded, respecting her decision without questioning it. "The stage to Helena leaves from town at noon." "I can take you in, Mr. Sullivan, if you're ready." Joshua stood, extending his hand to Victor. "Thank you for looking after my daughter when I failed to, and congratulations on your engagement." Victor shook the offered hand, his expression reserved but not hostile. "She's looked after herself pretty well. I'm just fortunate she chose to do it here." The ride to town passed in silence, Tabitha seated between the two men in the wagon. At the stage-coach office, Joshua hesitated before boarding. "I meant what I said," he told Tabitha. "I'm going to prove to you that I can change." "I hope you do," she replied honestly, "for your sake as much as for any relationship we might rebuild." After a moment's hesitation, she allowed him to embrace her briefly, their first physical contact since her escape that didn't involve fear or violence. As the stage pulled away, Victor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" Tabitha nodded, watching until the coach disappeared from view. "Yes. For the first time in years, I think I might actually be all right with him someday." Victor's arm slipped around her waist as they walked back to the wagon. "You're remarkable, you know that." "Most people couldn't find that kind of grace. It's not forgiveness, not yet," she clarified. "Just an opening, a possibility." "That's more than many would offer." They paused beside the wagon, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snowy street. Tabitha turned to face Victor, studying the face that had become so dear to her. "When I first arrived, you told me no one would touch me without my permission," she said. "You've kept that promise even when it must have been difficult." Victor's expression softened. "Your boundaries were important, are important." "They still are," she agreed, "but they've changed." She stepped closer to him, resting her hands on his chest. "I'd very much like you to kiss me, Victor Zimmerman, if you're willing." His smile was answer enough, but he replied anyway. "Been waiting months to hear you say that." Their first kiss was gentle, a tender exploration rather than a passionate claiming. Victor's hands remained at her waist, respectful even in intimacy. When they parted, Tabitha felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she had never experienced before. "We should get back to the ranch," Victor murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Weather's supposed to turn again by nightfall." Tabitha nodded, reluctantly stepping back. "We have a wedding to plan anyway, and a ranch expansion to discuss." As they drove back to the Z-Bar, Tabitha watched the winter landscape roll by, marveling at how much her life had changed in half a year. From a prisoner in her father's house to a soon-to-be wife and ranch partner, from isolation to community, from fear to love. The bruises on her wrists had long since faded, but she would always remember Victor's promise on that first day. "No one will touch you here without your permission." He had given her the space to heal, to find herself, to choose him freely. And in doing so, he had taught her that love shouldn't leave bruises, it should leave room to grow. Spring arrived in Montana territory with its usual temperamental mix of sunshine and snow flurries. The wedding was set for the first Sunday in May, when the risk of blizzards had passed and before the intense work of summer cattle drives began. In the month since her father's visit, Tabitha had received 3 letters from him, each sober, reflective, and respectful of her boundaries. While reconciliation remained a distant possibility rather than an immediate reality, the correspondence had begun to heal wounds she had thought would always remain raw. The ranch expansion was underway, the additional land purchased, and fencing begun. Victor had insisted on putting Tabitha's name on the deed alongside his own, making her a legal owner even before their marriage. "Just in case you come to your senses and decide not to marry me after all," he had teased, though they both knew that possibility was non-existent. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the prairie abloom with early wildflowers. Martha Holloway and the women of Timber Creek had transformed the ranch house with ribbons, flowers, and homemade decorations. The entire community turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers from miles around, as Tabitha prepared in her cabin, now filled with the personal touches that had made it truly home over the past months. A knock sounded at her door. "Who is it?" She called, adjusting the simple white dress Martha had helped her sew. "Telegram for you, Miss Sullivan," came Emmett's voice. "Just arrived from town." Curious, Tabitha opened the door to accept the yellow paper. She unfolded it with a slight tremor in her fingers, wondering what urgent news could arrive on her wedding day. The message was brief. Congratulations, stop wishing you joy, stop proud of the woman you've become, stop with love, father, stop. Tears pricked at her eyes as she read the words. Not for the relationship that had been lost, but for the new one that might someday be possible, one built on mutual respect rather than fear and control. Tucking the telegram into her pocket, Tabitha took one final look around the cabin that had sheltered her during her transformation from frightened runaway to confident woman. Tomorrow, she would move into the main house as Victor's wife, but this place would always represent her first true independence. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, held beneath an arbor Victor and the ranch hands had constructed near the creek that gave the nearby town its name. Martha stood as Tabitha's matron of honor, while Charlie served as Victor's best man. As Tabitha walked toward her future husband, she remembered their first meeting, her bruised wrists, his careful distance, the promise of safety that had seemed too good to be true. Now, as she placed her hand in his, she knew that promise had been just the beginning of everything he would give her. I, Victor, take you, Tabitha, to be my partner in all things, Victor said, his voice steady and sure. They had written their own vows, rejecting traditional language that spoke of obedience. I promise to respect your independence even as we build our lives together, to listen when you speak, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, and to love you with constancy and patience all the days of our lives. When it was Tabitha's turn, she spoke with equal conviction. I, Tabitha, take you, Victor, as my chosen companion. I promise to stand beside you in all endeavors, to speak honestly and listen openly, to build with you a home founded on mutual respect and unwavering love, and to cherish the gift of your heart for all our remaining days. The simple gold bands they exchanged symbolized not ownership, but partnership, an endless circle of mutual commitment freely given. As they were pronounced husband and wife, Victor's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the intimacy they would soon share. The cheers of their friends and neighbors surrounded them, celebrating not just a marriage but a union of equals. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing in the ranch yard. As twilight descended, Victor took Tabitha's hand and led her away from the festivities, toward the creek where they had exchanged their vows. Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman? He asked, drawing her into his arms. Extremely, Mr. Zimmerman, she replied, smiling up at him. Though I might keep Sullivan for ranch business, two Zimmermans could get confusing on contracts. Victor laughed, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. Sullivan Zimmerman has a nice ring to it. As long as you're happy, I don't care what name you use. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared overhead. The sounds of celebration continued in the distance, but here by the water, they had created their own private world. I never expected this, Tabitha admitted softly. When I fled my father's house, I was only thinking of escape, not of what might come after. And now, Victor's arms tightened slightly around her waist. Now I'm thinking of everything that comes after, our ranch, our home. She turned in his embrace to face him. Perhaps someday our family. The joy that spread across Victor's face was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. I'd like that, very much. As they walked back toward the celebration, hand in hand, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The bruises on her wrists had long since faded, but the lessons they had taught her remained. That true strength sometimes meant fleeing, that safety could be found in unexpected places, and that love, when genuine, left room to breathe rather than marks to hide. With Victor beside her, she faced the future unafraid, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they would meet them together as equals, as partners, as husband and wife. The Z-Bar Ranch flourished over the years, expanding its operations and its family. Tabitha and Victor welcomed their first child, a daughter, the following spring, followed by twin sons 2 years later. The ranch house grew along with their family, adding rooms and warmth with each passing season. Joshua Sullivan kept his promise, remaining sober and gradually rebuilding a relationship with his daughter through letters and, eventually, occasional visits. He never returned to the angry, violent man he had been. though the memory of those days served as a constant reminder of how easily people could lose themselves, and how challenging, yet worthwhile, the journey back to wholeness could be. The bruises that had once circled Tabitha's wrists became a distant memory, replaced by the gentle touch of her husband's hands, the eager grasps of her children's fingers, and the work-earned calluses of a woman who had built a life of her own choosing. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Tabitha and Victor would often sit together on the porch of the home they had created, watching the Montana sunset paint the endless sky in colors no artist could capture. Any regrets? Victor would sometimes ask, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness, and always, Tabitha's answer remained the same. Only that I didn't find you sooner.